Okay, this is after school enrichment class number 8, where you learn how to do the checkmate with a king and a queen against a king, and how to win with a single pawn. So first we're just going to take a quick run through it in one of the most difficult positions to win with a king and pawn against a king. And it starts by moving the king forward. It's not a problem that black can take opposition, because by the time the king gets to the 4th rank, we have a tempo move to turn it into black's move. The king must step to one side or the other, allowing the white king to go forward. And this is what we want. You want your king to be 2 ranks ahead of the pawn and on the same file or just to one side. There should never be a file between your king and the file your pawn is in. So again, we just simply take opposition again. He must step to one side or the other, and again we go forward. Once you get your king to the 6th rank, then your next goal is to get your pawn to the 5th rank, guarded by your king. And there's not too much that black can do to prevent it. Now in this situation, moving the pawn would be a critical mistake. So we go here. And now white should know his next 3 moves, which will be the same no matter what move black makes. And get the... Now once you have the queen, you want to trap the black king as fast as possible. Okay, so we're going to look at ways to do the checkmate with the queen, and then we're going to look at how we get the pawn to the other end. And we'll look at ways for the defender to defend against that. So it may seem odd, but we're going to look at the defense first. And we're going to have a situation where we are able to defend. Anytime the attacker has his king and pawn side by side, and you have your king 2 squares in front of either of these, then it won't matter whose move it is. And of course, with a rook pawn, you only need to get your king on the file in front of the pawn to have the draw. But when these are side by side, it won't work. The key idea is never let the king get in front of the pawn. So this quickly falls into a pattern. You would like to capture the pawn if you can, but good luck, he's not going to let you do that. The second choice would be to put your king on the square directly in front of the pawn. Anytime the defender can put his king on the square right in front of the pawn, on his turn, he has a draw. So as long as you keep making a move that should make a draw on each turn, you're going to end up with a draw. So remember, don't let the attacker king in front of the pawn. So we just go here. Now, of course, if the king goes over here, then you do this, and you're going to eat his pawn on the following move. If he goes here, you'll attack it because you get to move your king to the square right in front of the pawn. So the only other option he has is here. And if you put your king here, black will go here and he will win. So in general, until the pawn gets down to the 6th rank, you can go back to any of these 3 squares. But as a general rule, just go straight back. If you're backing up, go straight back. When you go to the back rank, it's absolutely essential that you do, or you'd be losing. and every time he tries to go around the pawn, you block him. Every time he moves the pawn up, you block the pawn. If you have to go backwards, go straight backwards in the same file as the pawn. Whatever side he goes around on, stop him from getting in front of his pawn. Now, just as it looks like he's going to keep on making progress, he's not. If I move this king to either white square, he could move his king to either of these white squares, and in any event, he has a win. I must go straight back here to preserve the win. And now if he goes to either side, I simply go to the same side. When he gives me check and I go here, white would be losing if it were white's move, but it's not. And if black moves here, that's a stalemate. Of course, if he makes any other move, then white captures the pawn, and we have a pawn by insufficient material. So let's go back to the beginning just so you can see that pattern. See, it just keeps repeating. Now, if you're the person with the pawn, you don't want him to be able to do that. He was only able to do that because the defending king approached when his king and pawn were on the same rank. So if you're the one with the pawn, you've got to get your king not one, but 2 ranks ahead of your pawn. So we're going to come back to that, but first we're going to look at checkmate with a queen. So we're going to see what kind of checkmates are possible, what kind of stalemates are possible, because we want to avoid those, and then how to checkmate with the queen, and then how to turn the pawn into a queen, and the 3 concepts for winning with the pawn. So let's start with this position. Now, I hope you're showing this video in a classroom. So, for the students in the classroom, please do not give away the answer to the following question. Here's the question. If white were to move his king, what happens? Don't say it. Just raise your hand. The instructor should call upon somebody where he or she is not certain that the answer will be correct or incorrect. Okay, the queen is 2 squares from the edge. That's why this position is treacherous and likely to cause a draw. If white moves his king anywhere, the black king will not be in check, and he will have no square to go to. Okay, so I'm just going to mention real quickly the things that we should already be familiar with if you're seeing this video by now, and if not, there's a web page you can go to at the end of this document here. If you haven't already written this down, gone to it, and bookmarked it, you should. Take a screenshot, take a picture, whatever you need to do. On this, there are videos that describe the different types of draw, the difference between check, checkmate, and stalemate. There are videos on the movement of each of the pieces, and you should also be clear on chess notation, the movements and values of the pieces, and the initial setup of the pieces. These are all things that are prerequisite, and this is the last of these videos where this will be mentioned. So basics you should know, the chessboard, you should know the terms, ranks, files, a lower right corner close to you should be a light square. There's 8 files and 8 ranks, 64 squares. You should learn the coordinate system, you know, like what is C3, what is F5, where are they on a chessboard. The basic movements of the pieces. If you don't already know them, you need to watch the other videos or stop this video here and read this. Castling and en passant. You should remember what en passant is. You should know how to castle. You should also know the conditions under which castling is illegal, such as if you've moved the king or rook. If an enemy piece controls the square you would move over or to, and you cannot castle while you are in check. So here's the initial setup. This shows the chess notation. For instance, this square is f3. Check, checkmate, and stalemate. We need to know that for what we're about to study here with the king and queen against a king. Check is whenever a piece is placed so it is ready to move to the square its opposing king is on. Checkmate is when there's no way out of check. Stalemate is when the person whose turn it is to move is not in check and has no legal moves of any of their pieces. So the importance of those definitions is stalemate is not a win. That's why we want to avoid it. It's only a draw. Also, it's not possible to have a checkmate if there's no check. And it's not possible to have a stalemate if there is a check. So the ways the game can be drawn, a stalemate is when there's no check and no move. And now this is covered in one of those YouTube videos. Insufficient material, that's like king against king, or a king and a bishop, or a king and a knight alone against a king alone. Agreement, that's when both players know that neither of them can win or lose, so they both say, okay, it's a draw. Threefold repetition sometimes comes up with a perpetual check. But a perpetual check is also just a type of threefold repetition. That's where the entire position is the same way for the third time, with all the same pieces on the exact same squares and the same set of moves available each time. In that case, either player, the player on move, could claim a draw. 50 move rule. If someone has only a king, you have 50 of your moves to make a checkmate. If your 50th move is a checkmate, you win. If you make 50 moves, it doesn't matter if the next move could checkmate, your opponent has the opportunity to claim a draw. But once you make a checkmate, they don't have an opportunity to claim anything. Chess notation, that's that A4 and B5 type of referring to squares. So when players are ready, the sooner the better. They should become familiar with the notation system, which gives us a way to talk about squares and moves. And again, write this URL down and bookmark it. Okay, so the check, checkmate, and stalemate are what we need to understand that position that we were just looking at. So if this were black to move, note that because the queen cannot move like a knight, this king is not in check. So a lot of beginners are tempted to say, oh, he's in checkmate, because when they examine black's moves, they go, oh, he'll be in check wherever he goes. But then when you ask the question, is he in check right now, they will sometimes say yes. Well, then the question is, which one of these pieces can move from the square it's on to this square in one move? And the right answer is none of them. So you would ask again, is he in check? And the right answer is no. And so you'd say, well, where would black move? And you could ask one square at a time. Can he move here? Can he move here? Can he move here? No, no, and no. He doesn't have any other piece to move, so this is a stalemate. So white failed. He did not win, because a draw is not a win. Okay, so suppose you move the queen here. Now black has a legal move. Now the king comes closer. And black again has only one legal move. Moving here with queen is not checkmate, because then the king could move here. Same if the queen went here or here. If you move the queen here, that's not checkmate, because the king could just take it. If I put the queen here, I just make a stalemate. But if I go here, the king is in check, because the queen can move diagonally like a bishop. or horizontally or vertically like a rook, and the king is guarding the queen, so that would be a checkmate. So from the beginning, this went here, 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 and then the third move is a checkmate. Okay, now it's important to notice with a king and a queen only against a king only, the only way that you can make a draw by stalemate is with the defending king on the edge of the board, that means in a corner or along the side, and the queen 2 squares from that side, as it was when the queen was here. So once the enemy king is on the edge, only then is it possible to do a checkmate or a stalemate, and that's the only time you have to be careful to not make a stalemate. Once the enemy king goes to the edge, you have to make sure you don't create a stalemate. And if your queen is 2 squares from the edge, a stalemate is highly likely if you're not paying attention. So let's look at this one more time. Here, 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 here. Okay, that's a pattern that you should recognize by now. All right, so we're going to make a different position. It's a little bit harder, and look at the path to getting the king onto the edge of the board. But first, we'll look at some checkmate positions. Now, since the queen can move like a rook, we'll look at some positions where the queen is used like a rook, because here, if you had a rook or a queen on this square, this would be a checkmate. So if this makes a right angle and the king is on the edge and you have your queen along the edge with the defending king, that'll be a checkmate. Now, of course, this could be turned sideways with the king over here. With the final position, your king will almost always be 2 squares from the edge and not your queen. Your queen will either be on the edge or 1 square from the edge at the end. Now, if I move the white king here, if this were a rook, black would have an escape to this square. But being that the queen can move diagonally, that would be a checkmate. Okay, so let's clear the board again and create a situation where we want to get a quick checkmate. Let's say this is here and black is over here. Okay, now you can go. Oh. When the defending king is not on the side of the board, you do want to put your queen and knight move away, and you want it to be on the opposite side of the king as your king. So your king's on this side, you want your queen on this side. Now black has only 1 legal move. He must move here. Now you creep up on him, and now he has only 2 legal moves. But if he moves here, I hope you can find a checkmate in 1 move. If the black king moves here, there are 2 different moves that white would be able to make after that that would make a checkmate immediately. So he goes here. Now after this king move, black has only 1 choice. He must move here, and I have 2 ways to make a checkmate. I can move my queen here, or I can go here. So with a little practice with king and queen against a king, you should be able to master that. And once you get a king and a queen against a king, you should be able to win. So now we're going to go to the situation with the pawn, where it's almost at the end. We're going to begin with the end in mind and go backwards. So we have, let's look at this situation first. And first we're going to say, what if this is white to move here? You'll notice that the black king is attacking this pawn. And if black is allowed to capture that pawn, then the game will be a draw. We could already know that this position is drawn. Why? Because on black's last move, he's directly in front of the only pawn. That means he went here on his move, which always gives him a drawn position. If the king moves here, remember, pawns cannot capture going straight ahead. So this king is not in check right now. You can't be in checkmate if you're not in check. But the king can't move anywhere if you move your king here. And so that would be a stalemate. Now, let's change this position. And simply make this black to move here. That's the only difference. Oh, gotta make the position again. So this now with black to play changes everything. With black to play, this is the only move he is allowed to make. Now, if white were to turn his pawn into a queen right away, what would black do? So what should white do? He's going to go here. And there was no other legal move for black. But remember, if this was white's turn here, then he could only go here or lose the pawn, resulting in a draw by insufficient material. All right, so we're going to go back just a little bit further. And this is a situation where people don't know which move to make. They know what square to go to, they just don't know which piece to move there. So remember that position where we each want it to be the other person's turn? There's another one like that along the way. So here, in this position, it is a common mistake to move the pawn. Because when black goes here, white would have a win if it were black's move here. Because if black were to then move his king here, you would move the pawn to the square in front of it without giving check. He would then go here, and you would move your king here, and the next move get a queen. But because it's white's move, if he moves his king away from the pawn, then the king can block the pawn immediately, and then we know that that should lead to a draw. So he could try this when black goes here and makes it white's move. So back at the beginning, moving the pawn up was the wrong move. This pawn should be moving to the opposite color of square that the black king is on. So in this position, if it were black to move, white would still have a win. So if we go board editor, and then we'll make this black to move. No, we got the wrong, everything in the wrong squares. There, and make this black to play. Now black is losing, because if he goes here, then you can move your king here, and that's an easy win. You don't have to know that this is mate in 11. You don't have to know exactly how and where you'll checkmate the king. The only thing you have to know is that you will be able to turn your pawn into a queen safely. That's all you need to know. If he goes here, well, now I can get to this position and make it his move, which means when he goes here, you can go here and it's his move. Now he's forced to go here, and you can go here and you'll win because you'll get the pawn. Now, we're going to show three concepts: opposition, key squares, and tempo move. The tempo move is when your opponent has the opposition, and so you simply move the pawn to not disturb the relative position of the kings, and then he must move his king, and then you get to move yours forward. Okay, so we'll say, here's an example of the tempo move. Now, opposition, you have opposition if it is your opponent's turn and all four corners of the smallest rectangle that will go around both kings are the same color. If all four corners of the smallest rectangle that will go around both kings, if all four corners of that are the same color, then you have opposition if it is your opponent's move. Because it is white's move, that means black has opposition here. But that's why the king needs to be not one but two ranks ahead of the pawn. That way, white now moves the pawn and leaves it to black to step to one side or the other. And then he gets to make progress. Whichever side he goes to, white should move his king right beside this square. So if he goes here, then you would go this way. If he had gone here, you would go this way. And once again, the king is two ranks ahead of the pawn. Where are key squares? If your pawn has not yet moved, you will have 6 key squares. They will be on the 4th and 5th rank, and it'll be the same file that the pawn is on, and then one to either side. If your pawn has moved, and your pawn is still on your own half of the board, then you will have only 3 key squares. They will all 3 be 2 ranks ahead of the pawn on the same file as the pawn and one to either side. So why are we thinking about key squares and naming them? Because if you can get your king to a key square, that means you're winning. So we know what opposition is, we know what a key square is, and we know what a tempo move is. So you must have either the opposition or a tempo move so that you can get the opposition until you get your king to the 6th rank. Once you get your king to the 6th rank and then get your pawn to the 5th rank, then you're winning no matter where the defending king is or whose move it is. So we are now ready to examine the very beginning position that we started with and go all the way with the queen to the checkmate. And don't expect yourself to get all this if you never saw it before on the first try. And if it were black to move here, he could get a draw. So, you can move the king up forward either way. And note that any move of the pawn too soon, and black will have a draw. Now he has opposition. Every time you have close opposition and he moves to one side, you go forwards. Never let the defending king get between your king and queen. And whichever side he goes to, you go the other way but forward. When he goes here, you create the triangle of doom. The king is 2 ahead of the pawn. Now you know you will be able to get your pawn to this square, and then so you will have 5 and 6. That means you'll be winning. And let's suppose he goes here. This is a temptation to move the pawn and make the wrong move. But instead you should go here, and whichever side he moves to, you go forwards and to the other side. White now knows his next 3 moves. And now black has only 1 legal move. And now, if he moves his king here, queen here is checkmate. But if he goes here, we can make the same move we would have made if the king were here. Now this is his only legal move, and there's the checkmate. Now there are many more complicated positions to learn with a king and pawn against a king. And in the next lesson, we'll be discussing how to assess how well you are doing in the opening, primarily by assessing your level of development. In the event that material is equal, which it often is for several moves, the most important factor is who gets a lot of their minor pieces, knights and bishops, off the back row soonest and toward the center. But when you're ahead 1 pawn, this is what you would like to do: to turn the pawn into a queen, chase the king to the edge, and make a checkmate. So hopefully now you'll have a chance to practice this against each other from this beginning position. And if you get really advanced at it, then you can let black go first. If black moves first, he should be able to make a draw here. So if you're really good at this, you can make the draw if you're black and it's your move. But as white, if it's your move, you should win every time. And remember that the king has to be 2 ahead of the pawn till it gets down to 6. So practice this, keep playing games online, and we will see you in video number 9 coming next. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and to subscribe. And this has been brought to you by chrischess.com.